Hello again, everyone. Welcome back for more creepy true stories. Cheers. I went with a big mug of peppermint tea today. So grab yourself something warm or cold, snuggle up, and let's get into creepy stories. So living in Australia, there have been plenty of creepy things in the bush, but few main ones that stand out. My car was getting serviced in an industrial area, and the quickest route to walk there from my house was cutting through bush. And this was just typical Australian bush. There was a vague track to follow, and then the track disappeared. But I knew eventually that I would end up back in suburbia. But in the middle of the bush, on a cliff top, was a large, round, 2 meters across, man-made opening, which, on closer inspection, was like a well lined with bricks, and about 10 meters deep. It had a steel grate over the top to stop people from falling in, but it was like something straight out of The Ring. I left and I hurried to the garage where my car was, and I asked them about it. And they were very vague and they didn't want to talk about it. But eventually I found out that it was a temporary place to house convicts who were building the road across the Blue Mountains. The guards were worried that they would run away at night, so they would keep them all in a well so they couldn't escape. Apparently, it opened up to a larger room at the bottom. I don't like that. Okay. Camping beside a river as a kid with my mom, we were in an area south of the Blue Mountains. We were the only ones there, apart from a farmhouse about 1 kilometer or 2 away. In the night, a random guy just appeared, and he started ranting about needing to protect us from wild dogs. He was wearing a blue flannel shirt, jeans, and an Acabra hat. Mom told him to go away, and he wouldn't. Eventually, we said that we were going to bed, and he sat outside of our tent, sharpening a stick with a huge knife. What? I remember asking my mom if he was going to kill us, and she was like, no, of course not. Meanwhile, secretly shitting herself. Eventually, I fell asleep. The next morning, he was gone, and we went up to the farmhouse to tell them, and they said, oh, that's just Ivan. He means well, but he lives on a farm not far from here. And they said that they would have a word with him to stay away. The next night, more tourists came, and everything was fine. We went home. We didn't think anything more of it. But a few years later, a guy was arrested not far from where we were on suspicion of being connected to several missing persons. As soon as I saw his picture on the news, I recognized him as the creepy guy at our campsite that night. It turned out that the guy the police arrested was Ivan Milat, who picked up and murdered hitchhikers along the highways heading south and buried them in the Belangelo State Forest on the other side of the river. Ironically, part of the story of Ivan Milat was behind the inspiration for Wolf Creek. I don't know that if it's a movie or a show or something, but okay. I was staying at I was at my great aunt's house, which is backed by a few acres of forest. One night, after I had taken out the trash, I decided to go on a nighttime walk around the yard. So I'm in the far back of the yard where the compost heap was when I hear a twig snap and I hear a few leaves crunch. I stop and I hear nothing more, so I decide to keep walking. As soon as I take 5 or so steps, I hear a few more twigs snap. So I stop and I look into the woods, and it's really dark. So I turn my flashlight on my phone. And that was a big mistake. Oh no. Around a dozen feet in, I see this pale thing crouched in the underbrush. This thing was hairless except for its head, which had chest-length hair, and it had this really pale white skin. I nope out of there. I have posted this on the paranormal threads, and some people think that it was a skin crawler. What the hell is a skin crawler? Well, some think it's a Wendigo. I have no idea what I saw. I live in northern Connecticut, so if anyone knows what this is, can you please tell me? I gotta read that again. I see this pale thing crouching in the underbrush. It is hairless except for its head, which has chest-length hair, and it has really pale white skin. I don't like that. What is up with Connecticut? There are so many creepy stories. Creepy, like, creatures and creepy places in Connecticut. So, this story is equal parts creepy and sadistic. Going back a good 20 years-ish now, though. Walking through the woods of the village where I grew up, my friends and I came across a small segment of path that narrowed between several trees. In the opening was a well-concealed length of rope, covered in a mound of leaves, just slightly off the ground. It wrapped around the right-hand side tree and went up into the branches above us. It was holding up a large section of broken-off tree trunk, then down to another thick stick staked in the ground. We kicked the stake, and it resulted in the massive log swinging down at around head height, which would have been chest height on a fully grown adult. Further down the path, we found a hastily dug hole in the dirt, which had been covered with thin twigs and loads of leaves, which we only found because, I guess, the wind had blown some of the leaves away from it. Inside the hole were loads of snapped, pointed sticks pointing upright and stuck into the dirt. So yeah, we could have been seriously injured twice that day. What the hell? This was a small village in northwest UK. Not much to do, so kids took to doing a lot of stuff like this in our area. Oh God, I hope whoever made those weird booby traps got their comeuppance one day. That's so messed up. So, avid hiker and nature enjoyer here, and I've got a couple of stories. A recent one was on a pretty popular and well-kept trail in northern Wisconsin. I visited that trail frequently in my early 20s. It had a couple of loops ranging from just over a mile to a couple that reached nearly 7 or 8 miles long. One year, I noticed that someone or some group had begun to place animal bone effigies along various trails. These bones were cleaned and bleached, like a stark white without any staining. It started with just little bones inserted into rotting trees and stumps, and then I started finding bones tied together with twine into weird symbols, hanging from trees just off the trail and usually significantly above eye level. Then I started to find entire deer limbs shoved into hollows of trees or between boulders, still bloody and raw, but strangely avoided by insects. Eventually, I started finding heaps of presumably deer meat just laying on a boulder off of the trail, dusted with forest detritus, yet strangely uneaten by animals or bugs. I'm sure it was just someone pulling pranks or some wannabe witchcraft stuff, but it was just odd because I walked that trail several times a week during all hours of the day, from nighttime to morning or noon, rain or shine, snow, and I never saw anyone hanging or arranging things like that. Another time, when I was 17 or so, I was backcountry backpacking in northern Minnesota with 2 friends for a week-long trip. On the second day of our journey, shortly after we began the hike for the day, we passed a guy with this huge black wolf dog, and he stopped and he chatted with us briefly. He gave me ex-Marine law enforcement vibes, but something about him and his dog felt uneasy. The dog kept whining and looking down the trail behind them, and the guy just seemed shifty and really eager to get out of there. I noticed that he had a pistol holstered at his hip, which didn't bother me at all, but what bothered me is that he seemed so on edge, despite the security of having a firearm. He told us that he noticed a single middle-aged male walking off trail that morning in a dark green raincoat, and he had gotten pretty bad vibes from this guy. Surely enough, later that day, the three of us noticed a dark figure in a dark green raincoat quickly step off the trail while we were walking on a long, straight stretch, and we had just happened to glance behind us. For the next 2 days, we thought that we kept seeing him only behind us, and thought that we kept hearing footsteps in our campground at nighttime. We took bathroom breaks together. We never went anywhere alone, and it honestly really ruined the vibes of an already rainy and muddy hike. Every night we fell asleep damp and clutching our knives, our bear spray, and our poop shovels like we were about to go out fighting. On the third day of Paranoia, we got to a campground filled with college-age girls, all being loud and overexcited and simultaneously scared of the woods. We thought sharing the camp would be good for safety. We warned them about the guy that we had been seeing, and their demeanor changed quite suddenly. And they told us that they had been hiking for a few days from the opposite direction, and they had encountered a married couple that had warned them of the same guy. We thought it would be safe with them, but that night we woke up to a girl shrieking, and then chaos broke out. Something crashed away into the woods, and a few of the braver people in our camp popped out of their tents with flashlights and headlamps. It turned out that someone had tried to open one of the solo tents on the edge of the camp, and the girl inside woke up to a figure crouching half in her tent. She kicked at the figure, striking it, which he immediately ran away. Some of the girls were getting absolutely frantic. I decided to gather some people together to start a bonfire, which was nearly impossible given the wet wood. Luckily, I found a stand of rotten birch trees nearby, and I managed to harvest some bark for kindling and had some people join me to keep watch all the way until morning. We were supposed to have another 3 days in our hike, but we decided to call it quits after that, and we called our ride to come pick us up from a different trailhead. I really didn't like hiking much after that, always feeling an overbearing sense of paranoia that someone in the woods was watching me. Oh, that's scary. My last story, I was solo hiking in Michigan when I was around 24. It was an old growth forest, a really beautiful region. The hike was pretty, but rather mundane and uneventful. I got a handgun for self-defense after the hysteria in Minnesota. It was supposed to be just 2 nights through a 12-mile loop of rather steep and hilly terrain. On my first night, 4 miles in, I got to my campground at the bottom of a valley. It was oddly still and quiet, no wind, and it was extremely cold for the season. There was supposed to be a creek running through the valley, but it had been dry, so I didn't have enough water for a good dinner, and I ended up snacking and preserved my water for the next day. I just couldn't sleep that night. It had been the first time that I was solo backpacking, and I just felt vulnerable. Yeah, no doubt. I was maybe 20 meters off trail, and it was so still and so quiet. I could hear random animals skittering about and the incessant whine of insects. I was lying there for what felt like hours when suddenly I realized that there was no sound at all. No animals, no insects. It was like the world had been muted. And that was when I realized that the ground had started to rumble. Very, very gently. I perked up, and it sounded like there was a large group of people marching by. The familiar drum of boots on densely packed earth of a trail, but dozens upon dozens of pairs of feet. And there was the talking. It sounded like whispering at first, and then a cafeteria of people started talking. Distant voices, all saying and conversing, but not a word could be made out. I actually felt like I was going crazy, but I could even see my water bottle vibrating from these footsteps. It got closer, and the voices got louder, but I still couldn't make out a word. I checked my phone, and it was 2 a.m. My heart was pounding. What could these people be doing out here in the dark? Even through my rainfly, I could see the dim light of the moonlit sky through the trees, but I couldn't see any flashlights or lamps or anything. It sounded like 100 people were passing by. I was shaking so badly, and I was so scared. When suddenly, it all stopped. My heart froze, and my throat caught a lump. And it felt like I was surrounded with 100 pairs of eyes on me. I chambered around in my pistol, and I took the safety off, and I just lay there, not daring to move. And I waited, and I waited, and I waited. There were still no insects, no animal sounds, no wind, and I just kept waiting. Then something exploded. It felt like my whole world erupted. Like a shock wave passed through my body, and it rocked my entire tent. I actually thought that I had let my gun go by accident at first, but all 15 of the rounds were still there. My ears were ringing. It sounded like a jet had passed by with some sort of sonic boom. And there was a roaring sound that quickly traveled away too. I nearly peed myself, and feeling a surge of adrenaline needing to pee really badly, I jumped out of the tent with my 10,000 lumen flashlight, and I quickly swept the sparse woods surrounding my tent. I quickly dropped my pants. I peed right outside my tent with a pistol in one hand and my flashlight in the other. I felt crazy. I finished up. I leapt back into the tent and I saw that it was 4 a.m. on my phone. I cried a little and I hid inside my sleeping bag. I waited until morning and I finished the rest of the 8 miles that day on 0 sleep. And I have not gone solo backpacking since. So we went camping a few months back, and the husband, our 2 medium-sized dogs, and I went to sleep in the tent. We hear the normal bug noises, owls, raccoons, and then all of a sudden, one of our dogs perks up, and we hear this ungodly growl / demonic sounding roar. It didn't sound like a bear or a mountain lion or even a pissed off raccoon. To this day, we have no idea what it was. The one dog, with a manly bark despite being a girl, starts barking her head off, and my husband and I freeze. And whatever this thing was, it continues to growl. We only have a knife, and neither of us know what to do. We want to know what the hell it was, but we also don't want to call attention to ourselves. Should we let the dog keep barking to scare it off? Or stop her so whatever this thing is not curious? Can it tear up our tent? Eventually this thing leaves. We didn't hear any footsteps. It just stopped. And I have never been so scared. The next morning, a plastic container that we had used for the dog's water was clawed up by something larger than a raccoon. And it still freaks me out. Hi, Leah. Hi. My name is Chris, and you are my favorite YouTube creator by far. It's really nice. Thank you so much. I love the scary true stories. I genuinely get so excited when I see a new video from you pop up on my feed. I have been wanting to share these stories told to me by one of my best friends who experienced them. However, I wanted to make sure that I got all the correct details. And I'm also not the best writer, so bear with me. One of my best friends, Jacob, has some creepy stories that I always make him retell when we go on camping trips with new people. I make him retell them for the people who haven't heard them, but also because I like being re-spooked for some reason. This first story always makes me look over my shoulder at the campfire. I always tear up out of pure fright. So a little backstory. Me and this friend went to the same high school, but we did not become good friends until a few years after. We both attended Whittier High School in Whittier, California, in Los Angeles County. And the school was known to have a huge bomb shelter that was built in the early 50s after World War II, when many in the US government and the public feared a nuclear attack by the Soviet Union. There has always been lore about the shelter, even when my parents were both students at the school themselves. But I had never met anyone who had seen it firsthand to actually know if it was even real. That's until I met my best friend, Jacob. So the story goes that when he was a sophomore, Jacob and his 5 friends all decided to check out the shelter themselves one late evening. Jacob and his friends are all skaters, and they always had a reputation of breaking into abandoned buildings and exploring. The shelter's entrance was located in the auditorium, which was pretty easy to get to once you were in the school. When they first got down to the entrance, he said that it was pitch black, so they all brought out flashlights that they were already prepared with. The way he describes the layout of the shelter is being one long and wide cement corridor with a few large rooms and dirt floors that I guess they had never finished, along with exposed piping and then broken bar lights above. The rooms were mostly empty and uninteresting, except for this one room that was apparently used for storage by the school. It was full of vintage school memorabilia like trophies and banners that were caked in dust. One of Jacob's friends even took a few yearbooks from the 40s home with him. That's kind of cool. It was basically a time capsule of Whittier. He said the other rooms basically just looked like abandoned construction sites, and that beyond the rooms and at the end of the corridor looked like another hallway with tiny lights leading to possible maintenance rooms. He said at the end of the corridor was also a huge random portrait of George H.W. Bush hanging on the wall. At some point during the exploration, when they were only about 30 yards away from the portrait, my friend Jacob told the other boys to turn off all of their flashlights because he wanted to take a few photos of the portrait that were very dimly illuminated only by the small maintenance lights at the end of the hallway. So they all agreed, and they turned their lights off, and they just stood there all staring at this picture for a couple of seconds, when suddenly Jacob noticed what looked like 4 long, skinny, pale white figures unclutch the door frame at the end of the corridor that they were staring down. Thinking that his mind was playing tricks, he didn't mention it to anyone immediately. And that's when one of his friends who was standing directly behind him said or asked, "Did you guys see that?" Confirming that whatever Jacob had seen was actually there. Without a word, Jacob immediately turned his flashlight back on and started pacing towards the exit, leaving his friend to explain what they had both just seen. To this day, it still gives him goosebumps when telling the story, and it's safe to say that he won't be going back down there anytime soon. Even if it was just a homeless person who had somehow got down there and decided to reside in the darkness, it's still creepy to think about. Another shorter story that this same friend had told me about is when he and his buddy from high school went on a hike once in the hills of the city that we live in. This particular trail is located in Turnbull Canyon, which is infamous throughout the city's history. It has been the site of many dark tales, including satanic cults that live in mansions up there, missing people's bodies being dumped in the canyon, and a passenger plane crash. My dad even has a story about how he was once chased down and almost killed by racist skinheads. We are Mexican, after a party up there when he was in high school. My friend and many others from school would always go up there and smoke pot in the wooded areas off the trails. On this evening, my friend and his buddy decided to hike up a mildly steep hill where they usually went to hang out. It wasn't too deep in the woods, but it was deep enough to stay away from police or from other hikers. A few minutes into their trek up the hill, they saw about 400 yards away from them a group of people dressed in long, brown, oversized robes with pointed hoods walking down the hill, but not necessarily in their direction. My friend was instantly filled with a sense of unease, while his buddy began yelling and antagonizing these robed people, cupping his mouth and shouting random insults obnoxiously. My friend told him to stop, and then he wanted to leave just as the entire group of robed people started to slowly walk towards them. My friend Jacob still goes exploring up there to this day. He says that he has never been more shaken up than he was at that moment, though. So, I was walking with my cousins about 14 years ago when we found what looked like an old burned down house. Or burned out house. So naturally, being kids at the time and having no sense of self-preservation, we decided to explore it. Mostly it was just full of charred wooden crap and junk, but then one of my cousins found an entrance to a cellar outside. We busted the old rusted lock off the door and we looked down. It was really dark down there, and we didn't really have any reason to go poking around it. Plus, we were starting to get creeped out. So we kicked some dirt down into it and then walked off. When we get about 15 yards away from the house, one of my cousins says that he hears a noise, so we stop. And yep, there was noise. Like somebody coming up the rotting cellar stairs of the house. We peek back through the trees, and I see this dark, kind of fuzzy shape crawl out of the cellar which we had left open. It looked kind of like a big old dog. But then, this thing stood upright. We hauled ass out of there. We all ran off in different directions like morons, each of us convinced that whatever this cellar thing was chasing us. I ran right through some briars in a panic, and I tore my arms and legs, which got me in trouble when I got home. We were all fine, but we did avoid going that far back into the woods for a long time after. The closest thing I can figure is there was maybe a small black bear living in the cellar. Maybe it had another entrance that we didn't know about, and we woke it up, being the little assholes that we were. But seeing something hairy and dark come out of that cellar and then stand up, it was like being in a horror movie. And I never want to see that old house again. A few weeks before this happened, I was telling my partner that Bigfoot is absolutely not real, and there's no way that you can change my mind. So we go to this farm in an isolated area in the forest to work for a few weeks. And the house is on a property, and it's really small, so we have to camp. We have a Honda Element, and the back seats are removable, so we'd replace them with a full-size mattress. It was comfortable, but still a little squishy with two of us in there. So one warm night, the fourth night that we're camping on this property, I decide to sleep outside of the car with my dog. I have a small tent and my sleeping bag, but the night was just so nice that I was laying with the upper half of my body outside of the door of the tent. I think it was around 4 a.m. I woke up for no reason really, and for a few minutes I just watched the stars. I had just seen a shooting star when suddenly I hear what sounds like a large something walking just a few feet away from me on my left, which was this thin wooded area. What was weird about it was I didn't hear it walk. I didn't hear it walk up. It was just suddenly there. These heavy, loud footsteps. I definitely should have heard it walking up to me before it was this close. How long had this thing been sitting there? Just a few feet away from me. It sounded large, like a bear, but it sounded more like 2 legs, not 4. And there was no heavy breathing, no weird smell, no sounds that a bear would make. So it walks by me, and I am completely frozen in fear. I could not bring myself to move a muscle, and I just kept staring at the sky. It walks past me. Once I could hear that, I finally got the courage to look. And what I see terrified me to the bone and sent me into straight panic attack mode. I can see some sort of silhouette through the darkness, and it is some sort of very tall person or bear. And whatever it is standing on 2 legs. The legs look thick, almost furry. And then I see it take a step, which confirmed what I was looking at were a pair of legs. I grab my little dog, I jump up, I rip open the back hatch of the car, and I Superman dove into the back. I pull the hatch shut and I look at my partner who is in the car, wide awake, wondering what the hell is going on out there. And I say, "Did you see that? Did you see that?" And he says, "No, but I heard it." And he also said it didn't sound like a bear, but it sounded large. So I freak out for a while, and 7 a.m. eventually rolls around. We get out of the car, and sure enough, there is a path of broken sticks and stomped on weeds where we had heard the creature walking. My sleeping bag had been left outside, literally vertically scrunched on the ground because I jumped straight up and out of it. I now believe that Bigfoot might exist because I have no idea what else that thing could have possibly been. So a friend and I packed up my truck and we drove from Ontario to Alberta for work. It was a 3-day drive and in early October. The first night we stayed in a campground in northern Ontario, but the second night we just pulled off into a tourist overlook and we set up a tent in a free camping area. And the site was down a steep, winding road that was hard to navigate in the dark with big potholes. We got to the bottom and there was a few grassy spots and a public washroom on the water's edge. It was already late and neither of us had any phone service, so we set the tent up, we made a sandwich, and we crawled into our sleeping bags. It was a cold night, but bearable, and just as I warm up and I'm about to fall asleep, I hear a car slowly coming down the road, but I don't see any headlights. I shake my buddy awake and I stand up in the tent to look out the mesh window, but I can't see anything because it's so dark. And this car is getting closer and it's rumbling like an old 80s Impala or something. I hear the brakes squeak as it comes to a stop, and now it's just sitting there in silence. And then we hear a door creak open, and then we hear 2 doors shut. I'm thinking, what is going to happen to us? Clearly there's locals or something because they had no headlights on coming down this road. We hear multiple footsteps out and around, but not close enough to us to really cause us worry. But then there's just dead silence. What felt like hours passed, and I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears when we heard one car door shut and the engine start up to the car. The lights quickly flicked on and off as he passed reverse, and he put the car in drive and slowly started up the road to leave. And again, with no headlights on. Once we heard the car accelerate on the highway, my buddy and I flicked on our flashlights, and I opened the tent door, shining both of our lights all over the open area and around the forest edge to see nothing. He kept watch as I tore the camp down, just pulling the poles out of the tent and throwing everything in the backseat of the Ranger, and we got the hell out of there as quickly as possible. We drove about 2 hours, and we pulled over at a well-lit service area that was just a building with bathrooms and pay showers, and we slept for a few hours until the sun came up, and then we carried on with the last day of our travels. Coming back from Alberta the following November, my wife flew out to drive back with me since my friend was now working full-time and I was a seasoned worker laid off for the winter and going home to be with the wife and the kids until spring. We drove all day and we stayed at the same well-lit up area going home since it was about a 15-hour drive from where we left with no issues. The next night, it was getting late, and we were looking for a place to pull over and crash in the truck for a few hours when this brand new white Ford Explorer turned on its flashers in front of us and then it hit the brakes. As he came to a stop in the middle of the road, his car went fully black. The driver door opened, and a guy who resembled the doctor from Jurassic Park or the colonel from KFC stepped out, throwing his hands in the air. I rolled down the window and I asked what was the matter. He said that he bought this car a month ago and was on his way back from his daughter's, and the car just kept dying on him. As we're talking, the car lights up again. I said to him, maybe a bad ground. He asked if he could use our phone because he had no service. And I stupidly said that I don't have any service either. And to be fair, looking at this old man frustrated and in need, I didn't really think anything of it. He goes, "Oh, there it is, it's back." And then he jumped in his car and he sped off. Northern Ontario on the Yellowhead Highway is pitch black, and it is full of winds and turns. So now I'm thinking, great, this old man took off and I'm gonna come around a corner and slam into him. And that's almost what happened a few minutes later. I come around a bend and here he is on the road and he's waving. He asked if I have jumper cables, which I did, but they were buried in the back under all of my stuff. The car lights up again, and he asks if I'll follow him and make sure that he gets to the next service center. He asks if he could ride with us, but all I have is the suicide doors with those little back seats. And this guy again looks like the colonel. What? I don't know where this story is going. He took off again, and when I caught up to him, we drove about 10 minutes when his car went black, and he coasted to the edge. And before he came to a stop, it turned back on again and he sped off around the bend. My wife is now pissed and wants me to abandon this whole guy, but we're literally in the middle of nowhere and it's late and I've only seen a few cars the whole night that we've been driving. As I come around a bend, I see his car pulled off and pointing down towards a house. He says out the window that there is a house down there, but there are no lights on. And I just want to see if they have a phone. Looking back, yes, I should have just drove away. But I say, all right, and I turn down the road with him. My wife pulls out her phone and she sends a text to her sister, but there's no service, but she sends it anyway, of the make, the model, and the plate number, plus the description of this guy, because she is certain that we are about to die. We get to the bottom and he gets out and he says, "Should I go and knock?" It's now like 1:30 in the morning, and I say, yeah, go knock. So he does. We're sitting there, and towards the hill, I hear this large chain dragging across the ground from behind us. I accelerate. That's creepy. I accelerate so fast, I squealed the tires, making the old man fall down on the deck of the house as the lights turn on and a younger man opens up the door, looking confused. My wife looked out the rear view and she saw a husky on a chain as we left the road and rejoined the highway and sped off in the most fear that I have ever felt in my life. She was so mad at me. We drove for about an hour until I saw headlights coming towards us as well as a tow truck. I felt safer and I sighed a sigh of relief. She still wouldn't let me pull over till we drove a couple more hours and found an actual truck stop that had several other passenger cars pulled over in it. I guess the moral of the story is no matter how broke you are, you should always budget for a motel. Okay, I'm gonna go. On that note, I'm gonna go. If you have your own creepy true story, you can find my email down below. And thank you so much for watching. I hope you are all doing really, really well. And I'll see you soon. Bye.